next speaker is John Mollison. He looks like he's light framed. I don't know how much he can bench press. I couldn't tell you how many alfalfa hay bales he could put up in a day, but his words carry weight. John?
Thank you. I'm light framed? Really? Do I got to flex? Look at these guns. Come on. Now, you didn't get this from Jerry this morning, so you know exactly where this presentation's going to go. My name is John Mollison, and I tell people if you meet me in an elevator, my elevator speech is that I interview old guys and I draw their airplanes. But I'll give you some cred behind that. I'm an aviation artist, and what that means is my artwork is in galleries, museums, and collections in 14 countries. I'm an aviation writer. On a good month, my blog will get approximately 12,000 readers a month. And I'm also the producer of the show Old Guys and Their Airplanes. And we have been distributed on PBS. We've had premieres all over the world. We've produced 20 documentaries from Europe to Vietnam. Basically, I'm really, really, really into history. Now, I'd like to start my presentation with this, with a round of applause. How many people like slight little guys? Just that. No. With a round of applause, how many people here believe we should teach history better in schools? Well, believe it or not, this is why Kim Hobbs brought me here. Because in my dream of being an aviation artist, a writer, and a filmmaker, I have gotten a deep, deep passion for American history, and a deep passion for having it told through the voices of the people that I get to meet in my work. And why I'm here today is because I got to take my work to the next level and actually bring it into the classroom. And so I also get to say this, and it's going to sound pompous. I don't want it to sound pompous, but I'm proud to say it. I am a Department of Education certified and endorsed content provider. So we're going to be handing out some of the content. You actually get samples, but somebody's going to come up short. But I brought, the Department of Education actually gave me a brick of these things, and we're going to hand them out. Here's how my presentation is going to go. It's not going to be terribly long. I don't want to bore you to death, and I might get to talk to you tonight at the dinner and shake hands, and I want to save some of my voice. But what's going to do is I'm going to walk you through the presentation that I gave to a group of history teachers. There's about 200 of them. But I'm going to give you this presentation not as I would give you as a history teacher. I'm going to kind of narrate it because there's a reason you all are here, and I want to let you know that your history and your stories are being embraced and respected by the diverse community of history teachers. So when I show you this, I'm going to be talking about it kind of in the third person. But about halfway through, I'm going to hand out copies of the educator kit that I believe you are most interested in. It's because in about 2008, I got to meet one of your own. I think last night, if you were at the dinner, you found out that I got to be friends with George McGovern. And I drew his B-24. And he passed on, but I was able to create an educator kit about George McGovern. And I believe that's why Kim Hobbs, he said, would you come and talk to the 15th reunion about what you've learned about George? And then at the end, if you have any questions about George McGovern or the educator kit, we can handle it from there. But I think this will probably take about 15 minutes, maybe 20. So hold on, and we will walk through it. So when I was talking to teachers, history teachers, one of my first things that I want to get them across is this idea about what is history and how do we teach history. And most people have these quotes in mind that when we think about history. The one is from the philosopher George Santayana: those that forget the past are condemned to repeat it. We've all heard that a million times. And then Mark Twain came up with the thought, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. I love that quote. And then There's this one. This is actually, I found out, was from a Narcanon, if you remember that. They were a big 70s anti-drug, anti-addiction treatment clinic. I think they were run by the Scientology group, but at any rate, the quote's great. Insanity is repeating the same thing and expecting different results. Please understand that when I was in high school and I learned history, it was from the gym coach. It was from the guy who was teaching basketball that weekend. And he, mostly he, but sometimes she, had as much interest in the history as maybe I have interest in, I don't know, I can't think of anything right now, but something I'm not really interested in. And it was names, dates, and places. And it was boring. And I wanted to tell history teachers that what you're doing is you're setting the tone for how people think, how people process information, knowing your roots, knowing your community. At the end of the day, that's worth far more to an American citizen than the game on Saturday. So I set these quotes here to set that relationship off. But I have another quote. A couple people here have gotten my challenge coin. I have handed them out, haven't I? Is anybody here? A couple, 1, 2, maybe 3, 4. This is my challenge coin. And on the challenge coin, this is the quote that I believe identifies my interest in history. It's an African proverb, but when an old man dies, a library burns. Another day, I'll tell you what old men opened their libraries to me that have allowed me extraordinary success and an extraordinary perspective on being an American, a father, a husband. And George McGovern enters that pantheon too. So this is the presentation. Its history is nutritious. 15th Air Force reunion, George McGovern Educator Kit. Now let's walk through this. I'm going to walk through a couple slides on it real quick. We also get to see a few videos that are part of the Educator Kit. They're not really long videos. They're actually long for today. They're about 2 minutes, but I think you'll like them. So I follow a recipe. I've had a whole career in marketing and advertising and communicating to people and to get to the point of action. What it takes to communicate to somebody before you can really change their mind or at least get them to a yes or no decision in their brain. And so I developed a little recipe. Is the first thing you start with is the facts. History is facts. We have a great temptation today to want to rewrite facts or reinterpret facts, but the fact of the matter is, facts are facts. Now, new information may change a fact, but a fact is a fact. And then I want to create some context, because when a kid learns a fact, we all know that that fact isn't static. The fact is for the moment. This morning's presentation from Jerry Whiting was outstanding. He was giving us context about how and why American flyers weren't just treated as POWs, but they were murdered by Austrian civilians. Context is important because it gives us that extra layer of understanding the fact. But after that, there's something, and I'm sure all of you here in the room have experienced this aspect in communications, and I just found out there's a professor here in marketing, and I know he's gonna support this 100%. But there's a reason advertising people and marketing people add something that is different or odd or funny. It's because when you invoke novelty in the brain, you're actually creating more mental pathways that you will be more susceptible, marketing, or receptive to a message. So I create novelty in this kit. And lastly, what I want to do is I want to create personalization. And what that means is when somebody goes through this educator kit, they can see themselves within the fact, within the context, and within the novelty. So that equals the George McGovern Education Kit. And I've done a number of education kits, but we're focusing on George. So this is what it looks like. This part right here are the facts and data behind the Educator Kit. And I think it's a great time now for me to hand these out. Now, I really am sorry we don't have enough for everybody. But what am I, Kim, you want to hand them out? You can take half. You take that side. And, oh, hey, thanks, Mike. Now there's a reason I wanted to have these printed. So there's tons of thousands of these printed. And you all applauded at the beginning that you want to see history taught better. I'm not saying I'm the best history teacher, but these are all gone. This is the last bit of these things that are around. And there's a reason why I had them printed and not turned into a PDF or maybe an all digital educator material, is because kids these days love to touch something that's real. They love to touch something that's actually printed. You had a question, sir? Yes, sir.
No.
Oh. Okay, so the part that you're seeing right now on the screen, and you can flip it open, but this is all designed to be fact-based material. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to add something when you said like how the Austrian civilians killed some of the airmen that were
Yes.
shot down. Well, my dad told me he was outside the tent talking to his flight engineer. And one of the things they said, who do we want to be captured by if we're shot down? You know, the civilians, the normal German Wehrmacht soldiers, or the SS. And then he also was talking to his flight engineer. He said they kept an extra clip for the 45 in his pocket. You know, do we fight and keep the last bullet for ourselves? Then he asked me who I thought they'd want to be captured first by, and he said the normal German soldiers. And I said, well, why not the civilians? He said, because a lot of them just killed the airmen because they were bombing their towns, killing their brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, you know, people they knew. So that was something that he literally told me. He was #1 German soldiers.
Right.
And, you know, the last one obviously with the SS, but they really didn't want to be captured by
Civilians, yeah. Thank you, thank you. And again, another plug to Jerry Whiting. And by the way, my room now has more people than Jerry's had this morning. All right, so when you look at this, when you open it up, you see that the front and back is, you're seeing the front kind of spread open. Those are facts, and those are all data points that harken back to the history teachers go-to of names, dates, and places. But when we added the next thing of context, and we're really talking about George McGovern, I added these new items that you're seeing in here that give greater depth to the character, so that when a student is reading about George McGovern, 15th Air Force, World War II, we're also giving him another reason to think about him as a human being and also to process his service. And the novelty part, this part, I kind of gotta tell you, we all get a professional win every once in a while. And when I was developing these things a long time ago, somebody says, why do kids want to play with cutout airplanes? They don't want to do it anymore. That is absolutely wrong. Teachers love to bring these into their classroom because kids do enjoy cutting things out and building them. And by the way, if you do cut this B-24 out, it flies a lot like the real B-24. I knew that was a joke y'all get. I want to bring this out. There's a reason that one is, if you look on the page on the left, that's actually an open page, but if you look on the left, you see Yo-Yo. That's the B-24 that George McGovern flew at least twice, probably 3 times, perhaps 6. But on the other side, it's a blank B-24. And what we wanted to do is give kids a chance to look and say, you know what, maybe I can draw my own nose art. God only knows what they'd be drawing, considering some of the nose art that we've seen in the other room, but that's okay. And I do have to say, if you see the DFC up there, I work for the Distinguished Flying Cross Society, so I had to put the plug in for there, and George was awarded a DFC. But the last part in this is personalization. We want to get kids today, anybody, kids of all ages, all of us, to be able to look at ourselves and look at history and see how we fit in. Like, the more I hear about some of your parents, some of your grandparents, some of your uncles, your aunts, your whatever, and you hear the stories, I am convinced I would be the biggest coward on earth. How that generation was able to rise to the challenges, I don't get it. and I am a little scrawny, but I couldn't handle it physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. But you know what happens when I start thinking about it and I start processing? I start going through the motions, and it's amazing at how that itself can help me become more courageous. Value character, value teamwork. So this is the educator kit, at least this part of it. We do have some interesting videos that are included. You've seen the QR codes on there, so I do have some digital engagement. Now the videos you're going to see here are very short, and I wanted to show them to you. They're online, and I just made them public. So most of the scores that you see on there, the play counts, are from teachers. But from here on out, these two little videos I filmed in January when Rob Collings, I went down to visit him in his B-24 in Florida. It's not going to be flying anytime soon, but if you've ever seen Witchcraft in the past, I was aboard Witchcraft, and Rob let me ask him some questions. I'm going to show you two. So here we go.
I had the opportunity of meeting George McGovern and having him sit in this cockpit and hear some of his stories. And while I wasn't alive during his presidential run, I had the opportunity to read about McGovern through Stephen Ambrose's book, and he was our hero. You know, we come right down to it, the heroism that he displayed as a B-24 pilot during World War II, flying out of Italy, was exceptional. And the fact that later in life, in his political career, it never made sense to me that he didn't talk about that. But it seemed to be indicative of a lot of the veterans that they didn't talk about their experiences. They felt, I'm not special. A lot of guys were doing this. Everyone was in World War II of that generation. But they all were very special. We wouldn't have our freedom today if it weren't for men like that. We certainly wouldn't have a liberated Europe. You think of the consequences of that are horrific. So we owe a lot to all of these veterans, and to learn the story about McGovern and what he did as a leader in World War II, even though he didn't want to talk about that, and he was branded as kind of a coward later in life. He was not. This is a guy who went through something that was really, really traumatic and difficult. So we'll start with the flight controls. We have the yoke in front of us. This is how we fly the aircraft. If we want the aircraft to pitch up, we pull back. To go down, we pitch down and it goes down. Roll left, roll right with the aircraft, and then we have rudders which control yaw. Moving to the center, throttles. Bring the throttles up, power goes up, obviously. Mixtures control a fuel-air mixture. There's turbochargers. This aircraft is both supercharged and turbocharged because it was operating at such high altitude. Then we have propeller control switches, cow flaps, and everything here. Up in front of us, pilot side, flight control instruments, our altimeter, how high we are, airspeed, how fast we're flying, directional gyro, what direction we're flying. And this is called an artificial horizon, because sometimes when you're flying an airplane, you're in clouds. You don't have a horizon where you can tell. So you're looking at these instruments to navigate and fly through clouds. One of the instruments we don't use today, but they did back then, is called a PDI. That's a pilot direction indicator. So the bombardier up in the nose with his bomb sight is telling the pilot, do you need to go left or right when you're on these bomb runs? The bomb runs had to be highly stabilized. You couldn't move around at all, and it made you a very, very easy target. Moving on over into the co-pilot side, you have engine instruments, manifold pressure, that's how much power the engine is generating, RPM, fuel pressure, oil temperature. All these are monitoring the health of the engines. And then one of the toughest jobs for the co-pilot is starting the engines. So there's a combination of switches they have to move in the right time, in the right direction, with a very interesting use of their fingers. Magnetos over there, which turn the ignition on to the engine. And then finally, coming on down here, we have our landing gear control, our flap control, and another thing that we don't use today, bomb pull. This is not how they drop the bombs on a bomb run, but when these airplanes were taking off, they were heavily loaded. They were what we call gross weight, the maximum weight. Oftentimes they were over that with all of the fuel for an 8-hour mission, all of the bombs. And if they lost an engine, they wouldn't be able to fly with all that weight. So if they had to, they pull this lever up and all the bombs jettison out of the aircraft. Safety, so hopefully they're not blowing up in some farmer's field.
Okay, those videos, a little long, but I wanted you to see them because put your mind in a high school kid. If they're going to have to Google George McGovern, I'm going to tell you they're going to get to the controversies of him in the Vietnam War and his failed presidential election and all the other sticky stuff with George McGovern. They probably don't get too much to his World War II service. So I wanted to make sure that we got to see George McGovern in a little bit of context there. The second video, most kids don't get to see a cockpit of an airplane. So there's a lot of people in the room here that have probably been aboard B-24s or had maybe even fortunate enough to have your parents narrate what it all is about. But I wanted to make sure that these kids had a chance to at least look and see inside and have something pointed to. And that video right there is the second most popular video in the series of videos that I've published about George McGovern and the B-24. But when Collins, Rob, I just call him Collins, but when Rob was describing that jettison of the bomb, that's also jettison of the bomb payload. That's also part of this story that you're seeing in The Educator Kid. Now you can read it on your own, but this is a story where George McGovern had a bomb, a 500-pounder hung up in his bomb bay, and they finally got it kicked loose, and it fell down, and George saw it blow up on a farmyard. And George knew right then and there that he had killed a family. And I wanted to tell this story. Later on, George was speaking in Austria, and he told the story, and he found somebody that was watching George being interviewed on a television station called into the TV station and said, "Would you let Mr. McGovern know that the bomb didn't kill us? I was the farmer. My family, we were out and about, and we saw the explosion. But we were grateful that at least somebody was here to serve and somebody here to help us beat the Nazis." Yeah, no kidding. In the getting to know George, you know, I mean, I knew him the last 4 years of his life, and I like to tell people he got to be a drinking buddy. You know, not that we would drink a lot. I got a great story about George McGovern, but you'll have to catch me later on that. But when he told this story to me, you know, there's two sides of the man. The man was so polished, and the man was such a seasoned media guy. You could tell when he was going on that rote internal mechanism that just turns him into a talk show host, and he's playing his role. But when he told that story about finding out that he didn't kill the family, I really got an insight into George McGovern because he did tear up. It was authentic, and I understood his hatred for war. Now, George and I, we were different politically, but we also saw eye to eye on a number of things. But most importantly, I learned a lot from him, and his example has helped change me. Well, long and the short of it, this story, you can read about it, and I want to thank thank you all here for that little piece of paper that shows George's position in that particular in the box on that particular mission. But this drawing right here, or this little illustration, is very popular with kids because they like to see the story. It's a real human side. But you flip it over, and I titled this "War in McGovern's Time." And people often don't get the idea, or they have a tough time understanding the map, the scope of what it means to be at war, especially in Europe. And I think the 15th Air Force, because of where you were, it was just it's a great map to present because it shows so much. But this part right here is really a way for kids to understand the B-24, understand the mission, understand what was at stake. And of course I had to plug my friend Barrett Tillman's book, The Forgotten 15th. But nonetheless, this is a typical educator kit that I produce, but this one is especially interesting to you because, again, of George McGovern's heritage to the 15th Air Force. So I'd like to close, and then if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything. I really am here just to hand this out, let you know that your family, your friends, your interests, your history is going on in schools, and it's being warmly received. History teachers are embracing the idea that we need to teach World War II. We need to understand people on a holistic level. But I have that little phrase, history is nutritious. And so I want to tell you that your stories, I'm taking them, I'm getting to market them and design them and put them out there. But I get a lot of these stories anymore from you, from your recollections and from your work. I think about Michael and your book, and I think about you, Jerry, and what you guys are writing. And if we believe this idea that history is nutritious, I want to let everybody here know, please don't doubt your capacity to feed other minds. I hope somehow, some way you're reaching schools, you're getting your family stories out there. If I get a chance to talk to you tonight, I'll probably say more of the same, only a little differently. But thank you very much for allowing me to present this little bit. And on behalf of the DOE, this is great. This is a great time to be teaching history. Godspeed. Thank you. Oh, that's my contact in case anybody wants to get a hold of me. Any questions? Any comments? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is John Meyer. I'm with the 325th Fighter Group. First of all, I want to say thank you for this. I also want to mention I'm involved with a group called Stories Behind the Stars. Our mission is to write the life story of every U.S. service person lost during World War II.
Oh, wow.
My Uncle Ray was a 19-year-old pilot. He got his wings 10 days after he turned 19. He was lost 28 June 1943 while protecting the bombers. As an Army veteran, I have given myself the mission to write the stories of every fallen member from the 325th, about 150 stories so far. I would like to ask everyone, you are connected to a bomber group, a bomber squadron. Please tell the stories of those who did. Please tell the stories of those who did not come home. So their stories can be told, can be shared, and they
live on.
Yes, live on, yes. Thank you.
And the congregation said amen.
Researchers and people to, write these stories. So if anybody's interested in that, you can look at the story. There is something in the PX. We have a piece of paper up by the 325th, information about that if anybody might have an interest in being like a researcher and a writer for Stories Behind the Stars.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I will just add to that, it's good to have stories of those that did not come home, but it's just as important to have the stories of those that did come home. They are the real heroes that preserved our freedom and came back to celebrate that freedom. And we ought to tell their stories just as much as we should tell the stories of those that didn't come back.
Yes, sir.
I'm Senator Jones. I served with the 455th 740 Squadron from October 20-something through April the 18th, 1945, which was our 35th mission. And the last mission of the 15th Air Force was April the 25th. And the next day they were on the runway to start a mission, and the flare went up, the war was over. And I think at that time on the April the 26th, the Russian-Ukrainian army and army of the third army met at the Elk River, and so that probably was part of the process that the war was over. The point I wish to make and the pertinence of it is in context of what you've said, and you've used the term context as people experience at things that are happening, and we are doing it now in the context of our experiences. George McGovern was 741th Squadron, and on December 16, 1945, our mission was the Brux, Czechoslovakia, although it was listed as Germany because they controlled it then. But at Brux, it was the synthetic oil production facility where a large proportion of the oil that survived the German army. So McGovern, 741 Squadron, our box, he was the lead pilot, and thus the bombardier would have been the person who determined when the bombs would drop. But they were unable to get the bomb bay doors open, and so George McGovern, leading the box, bypassed the Brooks facility. I have read that that mission was a suicide mission, and perhaps we can understand the bypassing of it, but in order to find an alternative target, our boxes was taken over Linz, Austria, and I guess you call it Steyr, and that was, I believe, a ball bearing facility where previously the 15th Air Force had bombed that, the ball bearing plant, and I think that was a major citation for the 15th Army Air Force and so forth. We had flak attacks, and our plane was severely damaged on that trip. I think in the book of Stephen Ambrose, The Wild Blue Yonder, I kept a brief record of each mission that we participated in. And most of the missions that our 740 Lieutenant Steve A. Peterson pilot was on, they are cited also through the viewpoint of George McGovern. So I can commensurate with that book, and I've read it, and look at the missions that I participated in. I can cite specifically that bombing the St. Valentine Tank Works on March the 23rd, 1945, I'm sitting in the nose steward looking out as we turn onto the target, and out at some distance, as we approach the bombing site, you can see the puffs of smoke and gray and black whatever. As you get a little closer into the target site, you can see the flashes of fire, and then a little closer, you're hearing the shells exploding. and you know you're in danger. And I wrote that and it would be impossible to go through that type of flak explosion and survive, and that our plane was number 3 gas tank. Shrapnel went up through it, pierced, and the high-octane gasoline is flowing out into the Bombay. The hydraulic system was shot out, and the number 2 landing gear was damaged. And at some point, when we tried to get it down, it would not go down. So the engineer, and I have experienced it since, the engineer and the pilot, it's that coordination, and the engineer knowing all parts of the plane. They're the ones that can coordinate, and they make the difference where you will survive or not in many cases. The engineer said to the pilot, as he put back to the hydraulic system, you may have braking action or one braking action, and that does not stop you. We will crash. Well, it did stop, and the pilot said, when we stop, get out of that plane as quick as you can, and so all of the crew did so. I want to say specifically that in all the writings, so many times the enlisted men and the gunners are not mentioned. But I have tried to emphasize that we were those boys to become men that grew up in not the amenities of electricity, one-room schools, not running water and that type of thing in the house, but those types of schools, one-room schools, one teacher for all grades, they're the ones that was dotted across the United States from the end of World War I to the my age of born September 22nd, 1925. If you had been born a little later and you volunteered or whatever, there would not be enough time for you to be trained to actually get into combat. It took about 9 months for an aero gunner to be certified and get your gunner wings. About a pilot, probably a year, and I've read that to be trained for combat duty, you're looking at about 2 years of time, and you see that's a long time for people to get into the war. I survived, never shot at any airplane because our plane was never attacked by an airplane. And that's the difference whether you survive or not. But you commented and others have commented, it's those who did not survive, they took with them their knowledge. And the people here today are here to remember them. Those who, like one mission, I think it was February the 7th, 1945, it was the Muskegon facility, marshalling yards, might have been an oil refinery, not too far from Vienna. We made at least 2 missions to Vienna. But anyway, I think he was here last year. He has celebrated his 100th year, not here today. But he could tell us, because his plane, a 88 millimeter shell exploded beneath the Bombay, ripped it apart, and they had to bail out. He was a prisoner of war. But he came back and he could tell his story. But all those that did not, they are out there in eternity for the generations to remember. And I'm here at 99 years of age.
Sir. That concludes this presentation. Thank you.